everybody. Welcome back to Byte Club, the monthly indie game club podcast. I'm your host, Nevyn.
And I am Jesse, your other host.
Fantastic. This month we are talking about Arbitrary Metric's Paratopic. But before we get into talking about the game, we got a couple announcements. First up, we changed the podcast name from Monthly Bytes to Byte Club because it's a better name and for other reasons that don't really matter. If you want to know, just tweet me and I'll tell you. It's whatever. And also, probably more exciting news is that you can now find the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, and YouTube. So if you're listening to this on one of those platforms and it's not your preferred, you can go to those others. And I'm working on adding it to a few other platforms as well. If you have a specific one, just send it my way and I'll see if I can get it on there. All the links to all of those podcast pages can be found at indie-bytes.com/byteclub. That's right, it's on the website now too. That's the exciting.
We're very excited, as you can tell, about this brand new change to the podcast.
This is the only thing I actually wanted to talk about on this episode of the podcast. So thanks for joining. We'll see you next month. Anyways, let's go ahead and get down to business. But as a reminder, we will be discussing spoilers later on in this podcast. The first half is going to be completely spoiler-free. We're going to talk about concepts and our overall thoughts about the game. And we will be sure to let you know when we're heading into spoiler territory. So if you haven't played the game, you can still listen to at least part of this. And then, decide if you want to go play the game and then come back and finish. So yeah, that's what we're doing. Let's start talking about this weird fucking game.
It's very weird. Paratopic is probably one of the weirdest games that I've ever played. Not ever, but especially played in the last couple of years. It's not spooky, really. It's not as scary as I think a lot of people made it sound like it was going to be. But it was definitely very strange for sure. Like we said, this game that we were playing for this month is Paratopic. It's a bit of a weird, like I said, spooky but not quite horror-y game. It's not that scary, but it's something that definitely is unsettling. It's a good way of putting it. It was developed by Doc Burford, Jess Harvey, and Chris I. Brown. Doc's previous work is pretty much entirely outside of game creation. He's a writer, a journalist specifically, with personal works on Medium and a bunch of other fantastic pieces on various other websites. Jess Harvey's work outside of Paratopic is on Tangiers, an atmospheric stealth horror game currently in development. And Chris I. Brown, aka BeauChaotica, his listed work is on Paratopic and a project called Game One, or G1 Dev, on Twitter, which doesn't have much info out yet.
Yeah, that's the brief overview on Paratopic. So let's dive in. Myles, put the musical transition here, you fuck. There will be no confusion this time.
Yeah, no, we'll leave that in.
Yeah, just leave it. Fuck it. So, I played through this game 3 times because I wanted to make sure I got everything. I wanted to make sure I had as decent an understanding of this game as I could get. And I think the first thing that I want to talk about is how well it handles atmosphere without going into spoilers. Because
For sure.
I think that we'll probably talk more about atmosphere once we get into spoilers because of a few key moments. But from the get-go, there are a lot of things that this game does that make it so alien while still being recognizable. You know that these are people that you're talking to, even though they're have warbly faces is kind of the only way I can put it. Like there's
it's got that PS1 texture, unfiltered texture, but it's wobbly because of the integer maths look to it. Really bizarre, which actually adds to the unsettling thing I was mentioning earlier for sure.
there's also all sorts of things about, like, around the environment that you can just, like, interact with. Like, there's a stack of tarot cards that you can interact with. You can't tell what's on them because they're so low res, and that kind of makes them creepier, too. And it's just, this world feels realized, even though there's very little info that you get about it. And I think that a lot of that comes through, or the reasoning for that comes through when you take a look at an article that Doc actually wrote about why he made this game. And I sent this to you. And essentially the article was called, like, why I tried to change walking sims or something like that. I didn't pull it up because I'm lazy.
Something like that, yeah.
But he basically just goes into how, like, he was kind of disenfranchised or didn't like what that genre had become because they're built around the severe lack of interactivity. Like, a walking sim, we all know the term, I assume, but for those of you who don't, it's basically a game where you move forward from point A to point B, going through an interesting environment, hopefully interesting environment. And the primary form of storytelling is really through narration. You know, like the first big one that came out on the scene was Dear Esther, whenever that came out, ages ago. God, that game has been around for a while.
Oh, yeah.
But you literally walk through a relatively linear path through an island. You look at some very, very gorgeous vistas, and you hear somebody narrate about life, death, and like the meaning of it all. And it's such a divisive genre. Divisive?
Divisive, yeah. I think is the way you say it. It doesn't matter.
Who cares? It's a word.
Yeah.
People are really split about this genre because there are people who are like, oh, it's not a game. All you do is hold forward. And other people are like, no, it's a game because it's a game. I'm in the latter camp. And he basically saw, like, how far those games hadn't come. Overall, when you, like, his basic theory, from what I'm picking up, is that the genre has changed, but when you look at it, not a lot. And he wanted to see what he could do differently within that genre. And he does a lot of really cool things with interactivity, and I think it all shows and it all pays off, and it's extremely interesting.
For sure. I do believe, though, that in that article, Burford ends up saying some stuff that's not exactly applicable now as much as it was when they started working on Paratopic, or the idea of Paratopic. Obviously, you can look at games from 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, and you will see that through line from Dear Esther, and how everyone was kind of emulating that style. Everyone was trying to find the next, way to sort of feed off of that. It was using it as the basis for a genre, but it wasn't necessarily, it wasn't necessarily trying to be that. It was just trying to be its own experience, which is not a bad thing. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I am trying to say is that because Burford was trying to change something that at the time wasn't changed yet, things have evolved so quickly in the time that it took them to finish this game that, a lot of what he says has already been evolved. And I think this is not a bad thing. Again, like, this is part of that evolution. Games like, The Vanishing of Ethan Carter,
Gone Home.
Yeah, Gone Home especially, yeah, for sure. Gone Home, Vanishing Ethan Carter, What Remains of Edith Finch, even Virginia a little bit, even though that's a little...
That other game that the Chinese Room did.
Yeah. The one.
God, I actually can't remember the name. Welcome to the Rapture or something like that?
Yeah, Everyone's Gone to the Rapture, yeah.
That's the one. That's the one. You're going to have to correct me on the name of a game every episode because we're 2 for 2 right now.
That's fine. I'll get you. I got your back. That's what I'm here for. Good. Wikipedia.
So I did just pull up the article, and I was scrolling because I wanted to remember something. And he actually quotes, or doesn't, like, directly quote, but he mentions an article that somebody else wrote about E3. And he basically says it was an article, quote, by one of those big games have to be art, no fun allowed type of people. As an artist myself, I've learned not to take these people too seriously, but I was curious. What games did this critic think were artistic? What games did they think merited a response? His answer, a list of walking sims, end quote. And then he kind of explains what we did about walking sims, and he goes on to basically say that people were pointing to walking sims as an answer to the there are too many games based around violence. And he was like, well, you can make non-violent games in other ways, but also I can take this genre that you strictly believe is non-violent and not necessarily make it a violent game, but make it about violence. And to that end, Paratopic ended up being about violence and about poverty. Which I think are two extremely interesting and very intertwined concepts that aren't really tackled in games much. Like, you'll see them in movies, but you don't see people talking about how poverty leads people to violent things in games, because it's not a good feeling to like witness stuff like that and to think about stuff like that. Nobody enjoys thinking about it in that gritty, real way. As one aside, before you have a retort, I'm sure, he calls Amnesia a horror-themed walking sim, and I fucking love that.
I mean, it's accurate.
It's
really
very
is.
accurate. You walk, you do some puzzles, and you hide from monsters. And I think that kind of goes to show how broad the genre is and how wide his understanding of the genre is.
Well, I mean, even as a genre, it's not particularly like he says. It's a very large scope within games itself, right? You can fit anything into that category depending on how you break it down. Like, how is What Remains of Edith Finch a walking sim if Dear Esther's a walking sim, right? Like, they're not
so very
fundamentally different, but they're very, very different. Yeah.
Yeah.
The point that you would argue that there's nothing that really holds them together other than they just focus on telling a story. And if that's what defines the genre, then
every game is
there's
then
a
Half-Life 2 is
lot of walking
sim, right?
sims. Yeah. Half-Life 2 is a walking sim with combat puzzles. Like, okay.
When you gonna make
stuff
that
like that.
video?
No, I'm not doing that. I'll save that one for Games D. We'll do one of those.
We're 2 for 2 on callouts for him now too.
Yeah, weird. Yeah, is that what the podcast is now?
I guess that's welcome to the James D Talk Shit podcast. Love you, buddy.
So walking sims, I mean, traditionally you can look at them in general, or you can look at them really specifically. Like I said, there's lots of walking sims out there that are doing interesting things, but there's also a lot of specific ones that are doing really specific things. And the violence and the poverty is one of the things, like you said, like I've never really seen those two things brought together in a lot of games. There are some games that show how poverty and violence are sort of intertwined, but it requires a level of inference. And I think even this game does. Paratopic definitely requires some level of understanding.
It doesn't like explain it to you outright. You do have to dig to understand what's going on here.
Yeah. It doesn't even supply you really with like a poor person who then goes and shoots a gun to collect money. It's just doing things that aren't necessarily considered to be upstanding for the purpose of escaping that poverty. I mean, I again don't want to get too far into it, but there's themes of trafficking, not necessarily of humans, but stuff like that. There's violence that's connected to that, and there's just monotony and everything like that, and how that ties into it. I think in a lot of ways, how we have to find the joy in life through sometimes what we see or perceive as very, like I said, monotonous things, like taking photos of stuff or just talking with a person in a gas station, right? Like just having a casual conversation. It's stuff like that. Observing items in that same gas station, just looking at them for the sake of it.
Well, there's another reason behind the gas station sequences, but we will talk about that later because that is 100% spoiler. But I got some stuff about the gas stations for you, buddy.
But just generally, there's a lot.
No,
of
I know
that
what you
sort of
mean.
stuff
Like there is a lot of that. It's almost multi-purpose storytelling.
For sure, yeah.
To pretty much everything that happens, because every single interaction that you have in that game, apart from picking up the tarot cards or squeezing ketchup bottle, has like two sides to it. There's a thing that you're seeing, and then there's the reason that the character is actually doing it. Something else that I think was interesting, and this is what I was trying to say earlier, but I remembered now. He talks about how walking sims are narration heavy. Typically you're learning about a story that happened before you got there.
Mm-hmm.
But other games, or no, this is something that I read elsewhere. Burford didn't say this, but other games are very based on experiential storytelling. So like to pull in Half-Life 2 again, you're not being expositioned story about what you're doing as you're fighting the Combine. The story is that you are fighting the Combine, and you are experiencing that as you're going. And with Paratopic, he ended up basically making a very experiential story walking sim, and it feels distinctly different to other ones, almost to the point where I don't want to call it one, because it does things in a different way. But again, we get back to genre lines and all that BS, so we'll avoid the genre lines discussion. But it's extremely interesting to me how he builds the atmosphere, builds the underlying themes through use of aesthetic and character actions, does what he does with how you perceive them, and sticks the landing after you do a little bit of reading into it. I haven't seen something presented in this way before, and it's just extremely exciting to have this and know that it exists.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Yeah, it's cool to have something like Paratopic that doesn't sacrifice what it's trying to be so that it can appeal to something, right? It has a goal for what it wants to show the player or what it wants to represent for the creator, and then it just does that. And they didn't try to make it appeal to a certain subset of gamers or like people that might enjoy, you know, weird horror themed stuff. It's just doing what it needs to do, and it's doing it very well, which is something I really appreciated for sure. Something you said a little earlier that I thought was interesting is how we look at walking sims in this sort of mechanically dead sense, how there's very little depth, but then also how that goes into how we perceive them as being about a story that used to happen, something that did happen, or something that happened around you, right?
Mm-hmm. Or happened
and
before
how there's
you
that
got
element.
there.
Yeah, it happened before you got there even. I mean, I've played games where the main point, what you're doing, you know, all the gameplay and everything, while that is what's happening right now, it's not what the story is about, right? I mean, look
Like
at the first
BioShock.
BioShock. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like any game like that, really. Any System Shock, anything that ends with the word shock.
Prey
Yeah,
Shock
Prey.
is a game.
Any of those immersive sims, those Looking Glass Studio sort of 3D adventure games, they're all the same sort of idea where there's a story that happened and there's a story that's happening. And Gone Home is, I think, the same sort of idea. As much as there's not something that's happening right now on like the surface, that's not directly
There
explained.
is. Mind you, I haven't played, but I know a lot about the game, and
Oh, you should play Gone Home.
Oh, I definitely should. It's been on my list for a while, but you know, hashtag that adult life.
Right.
But that one very much is like exactly what you're talking about. Like you're going through and learning the story of what happened before, but there is still that story of what's happening now is the character you're playing is learning all of this. Whereas if you look at Dear Esther, it's just beautiful poetry about a thing that happened before. You know, you're listening to these letters that were sent before somebody. Spoilers, and you go through that. That's a very, very hard line in the walking sim genre, I think, that we saw kind of blur over time since Dear Esther and since Gone Home. That's what I got there. Trailed off.
No, for sure, yeah. It's definitely something you need to consider about those games when looking at them, is that they're not necessarily, you know, they're a lot more down to interpretation than any other game that or genre that I've taken part in. There's a lot going on that you can, you know, perceive differently, that you can accept differently, and what exploration you do can tell more of the story than hearing everything in some cases. Because how you look at it, right? Like, again, Gone Home is just a really good example. Different parts of the story that you can learn, they don't necessarily, like, they can change how you perceive the story overall and your own interpretation of it. And Paratopic obviously has the same sort of thing, where the more you explore, the more that you're willing to look into things, the more you find out about what's going on, and you end up interpreting the story differently. It makes you want to play it again, because obviously you're gonna find those things you didn't find the first few times, you'll appreciate that element of it. So that's really cool. And it's short. So like in having multiple interpretations, depending on how much you explore, there's opportunities for you to go back, and it's not some huge time investment. Like if you play Gone Home, you know, you can kind of spend as much time as you want in the house, and you can find things out in different orders, and that can affect how you understand the story. But ultimately, you know, you can spend as much time as you want, and once you finished it and come back, you're kind of looking for the same things over and over again, and it's a long-ish experience, where Paratopic's, what, like 40 minutes long?
Yeah, it's 30 to 40 minutes, depending on how
yeah.
fast you blast through, and that's...
Exactly.
That's one playthrough. And like I think I mentioned, I played through it 3 times. So it's a replayable game, not like the most, but depending on how your first playthrough goes, I mean, you're gonna, if you want 100% this game, you gotta do at least 2 playthroughs because of how some of the achievements work. And those achievements end up directing you towards story and towards more information and like fun interactions. So it's not just doing it to get that plus 100 gamer score. You're doing it because it rewards you with an interesting interaction. And that's just another fantastic element of this design that it gets to have thanks to how short it is. Like if this game were an hour long, like full on an hour long, I don't think I would have played through it as much.
Not for sure.
It's in a sweet spot.
Yeah. There's elements of it that you want to go back to. There's stuff that is tedious no matter how many times you play it, and we'll get to that in a second. But yeah, for sure, its length helps in the enjoyment of what it's trying to do and how it does it. So yeah, very, very good game.
Before we hop into spoilers, did you have anything else you wanted to say about it?
Oh no, I want to get into the spoilers. Let's do it.
All right, so this is a spoiler warning. We're going to go into spoilers and just talk about pretty much everything that happened in this game. So if you haven't played it yet, if you're interested in it, go pick it up, play it. It's 30, 40 minutes, and come back, listen to the rest of this podcast. We are back, and once again, we are firmly in spoiler territory.
Oh yeah, spoiler city.
This game's fucking weird, man.
It's definitely weird.
It's
definitely
so
very,
weird.
very weird.
And like, okay, I thought I knew where I wanted to start with this, but now that I'm here, I don't know what a good starting point is because there's just so much. I guess let's start at like the beginning, like what you're actually doing. And
is there an answer to that question?
Yes, I'm pretty sure I have one because I spent a lot of time reading fan theories, and I have a few ideas. Because as you know, fan theories are very credible. There were some theories out there that were like, oh, you're one person, and this is a non-chronological story, and you're in purgatory, basically. Which I think is a really cool idea. This person whose name I can't remember was on the Steam forums for the game, and their theory was basically that you are in the same kind of purgatory that's presented in like David Lynch's media. You know, like the Black and White Lodge in Twin Peaks. Those are supposed to be purgatory. Yeah. And apparently you are residing in a realm that is that, along with other people who are stuck in that realm. And there's all these stories about like aliens and stuff like that, and those are people from outside of purgatory who are coming to visit or something. It wasn't the best theory, but I think it presents some interesting ideas, and the link to David Lynch is especially interesting. And
well,
I think that's a pretty strong
It's fairly
link.
obvious, right? I mean, whether or not any of the developers make a clear statement on it, I mean, it's got the smash cuts, it's got, you know, the weird, I mean, you start in a diner. Like, I don't really know what else you need, right?
You do start in a dimer. Dimer?
Yeah.
Dimer. Dimer is my favorite kind of master-on.
But yeah, you start in a diner. It's got the hard cuts that are really abrupt and that cut to things that don't necessarily tie together right away. It does a lot of stuff that Lynch's films and shows have done really, really well. So obviously, if they're attached narratively, I wouldn't be surprised, even if it's just an homage.
Moving on from that theory, my actual favorite theory that I found, and that I think makes a lot of sense, again, still the story is not in chronological order. And I think that one is pretty much irrefutable because of how these cuts are done and because of the order in which these events happen. There's no way you're playing through this game in chronological order at all. But you're playing 3 characters. One of the characters is a smuggler who was like saddled with debt and is basically forced and strong-armed into this job to pay it off. The second one is an assassin, or like a runner, who is like trying to find a very specific tape, which these tapes are the thing that the smuggler is running. So we have a character connection there. And then the third character is a hiker and a bird watcher. That one's pretty much confirmed when you look at the achievements, because they are things like bird watcher and sniper, and it all has to do with taking pictures of those birds in the 3rd or 4th vignette. And that hiker is trying to take a picture of that red bird that you have to chase down. That's the whole reason that hiker's there, and that's why that bird, mechanically, why that bird continues to move, and that leads into you getting deeper and deeper into these abandoned areas, which I actually know a little bit of lore about now. Huh. I know Paratopic lore. Can I put that on my resume?
I guess so.
And basically the theory is that all 3 of these characters, while they don't know each other, they are connected, and sort of, if you put the vignettes in order, you get a very interesting story about this hiker who wanted to take a picture of a bird and wandered too close to an electrical plant that had a mysterious accident. The hiker is then brutally fucking murdered by some weird entity that some people theorize is one of the aliens that the guy at the gas station talks about. So then the assassin is on a hike. The assassin is like checking something out. I don't know why the assassin follows in those footsteps, but she basically goes and finds the body and finds the camera that the bird watcher left, calls the police or whoever and says, hey, there's a body here. And then the assassin goes back to the diner. And that's the second scene that you get in the game, when you get off the phone and then you load the gun. And while that's all going on, the smuggler off screen loses a bet or something and basically gets forced into smuggling these tapes and ends up getting caught crossing the border by the border patrol between this country and another, and they're like, oh, these tapes. And that's the first scene in the game. And so when you kind of have that framework, you can see this story of coincidence and dread. And you can see how people are... The hiker's just trying to get enjoyment. The assassin is trying to do a job, a violent job. And the smuggler, who is very much in poverty, lives in a 1-bedroom closet-sized house or apartment without even its own toilet, is just saddled with debt and doing whatever they can to get out of it. And that's where we start to see literally all 3 of those themes come into play, is when you start piecing everything together.
Yeah.
That was a lot of rambling.
It was. So that theory, as much as I think it makes probably the most sense as anything will make within this game. Like I said, trying to find a confirmed order, whether or not there is one, I think goes not against, but is part of what makes going against the idea that there's a singular narrative, that there's one path, one order that everything is supposed to have gone in. I think goes against the idea of what those kinds of games can be. Right? What you end up finding tells you different stories. Like when you speak to the gas station clerk, there's different things that you end up learning depending on what you choose to talk about. Obviously, you can end up talking about everything in the same run, just depending on making sure you click on the right things, right? Yeah. But for the most part, there are things that you will learn about if you choose to learn about them. And they'll change your perspective on the world and what's going on, right? I mean, when you're talking about local venues, you can talk about the power plant, or you could just talk about the milk store. Like, there's things you can talk about, and they don't matter. And I think Burford, in his article about the game, talks about that, and how there are those levels of interaction, and how the player chooses to learn things and chooses to interact with things on their own. It's not like the game directs you, other than in a few key instances. There's not like too many moments where you're forced to do something, which I think is really cool. Like that's part of what makes it so endearing and so enjoyable to me as a small short experience like that.
Yeah, it does a good job. Thanks to those inconsequential interactions, it does a good job of making you feel like you are in this world, this realized world.
Yeah.
Which is something else that I learned today Burford is big on. There's another article I'll have to share with you. It's really good about existing within a world. And after reading that, I can see a lot of those things within this. He basically talks about how immersive sims are designed more around being mechanically immersive and less around being sucked into the world that you're playing in. And I think that he just does a fucking fantastic job of pulling you into the world of Paratopic, thanks to pretty much everything you just said.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that there's just shit lying around the environment, and there are whole major story elements that you can not notice or just completely miss. And they don't directly pull you towards it. It doesn't grab your head and point your nose at this door, or something as small as this vending machine. It just leaves them there and says, if you find it, you find it.
Well, to be fair, the vending machine, that's not necessarily true. Right? I mean, the game does have an element where it does pull you towards that by telling you can go get a drink if you want.
There's more to the vending machine. Like, if you want to, basically, you have to hit it a few times. Like, it doesn't pull your face to the fact that you have to interact with it more than once. I didn't get that until my third try, when I was just like, I'm just going to hit this a bunch and see what happens.
Well, if you hit it once and you walk back to him, doesn't the clerk say sometimes you have to hit it a few times?
No, he never said that for me.
Maybe I might just be remembering it wrong. He might have said something else, but he said something that made me think, I just have to click on it a couple times.
He might have said something and I just missed it, which kind of, again, pulls into this whole thing.
Yeah.
I wanted to say about the gas station. You were talking about how it's like all for, like, it does play into these themes of doing whatever I can to get some enjoyment and pass the time, right? When I have nothing else. But also, did you look out the window during the second gas station visit?
Yeah. There's you see the alien standing next to the car.
The big spooky boy is hanging out next to the car.
Or whatever it may be. Who knows if it's really an alien?
It is. Yeah. That shit filled me with dread. And when I didn't notice that on my first playthrough, my second playthrough, I played it with my friends, and we just like looked out there and we saw him and we're like, oh no.
Yeah.
Very panic inducing.
Super so.
What kills me about the first visit is that you can look out all the windows and not even see your car.
Yeah, which is really weird.
Super weird, but also really good.
Something that I don't know if are you done talking about the whole
feel free to move on.
Yeah, because there is a point I wanted to really discuss with this game, something that I think it does well, probably more than anything else that it does. And that's its use of the low resolution that it has.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, because there's a lot going on with that I think they just absolutely nail, like, just perfectly, right? Like, there's nothing more impressive to me about the game than its utilization of its lower resolution, because a lot of games are low res for the sake of minimalizing how much work they have to do, or
saving money,
decreasing
saving time, saving processing.
Exactly. Yeah, resources for the systems and stuff like that. There's different reasons why they would do that, but in this game it's like an artistic choice all the way to the end, right? And the reason I think people find it scary is because of that choice. Yeah.
It's so cool. I'm gonna let you go off because you sound like you got a lot to say, so go for it.
Oh yeah. So, I mean, there's tons of points where the game almost perfectly shows what it can do with a lower resolution. I mean, closer to the end, right, where you see that alien figure, whatever it might be, when you're playing as the hiker and you walk up to it. The first time I played it, I didn't even notice it really, but I noticed a couple like faint lines.
Yeah, when you like first step through the fence and you see something over there. What the fuck is that?
You're like, what is that weird line over there? And you walk closer and like, you realize, holy shit, what is that? And by the time you've finally figured it out, it's killing you, literally. Like, that is so smart.
How
right?
close did you get to it before it disappeared on your first run?
Pretty close.
I did
fairly
not.
close.
I got maybe 10 feet away from it, and I still couldn't really tell what it was, and I was like
Well,
playing.
you can also take a picture, right? Like, you can zoom in pretty close.
You can zoom in pretty close, but it distorts. It gets glitchy, so you still
It does,
can't.
which is cool.
It's incredibly cool, and that's also the only that and scene transitions are the only parts in the game where it gets glitchy like that.
Yeah. Did you take a picture of it when you zoomed in?
I wasn't able to. Does something happen?
Yeah, if you take a picture, it just warps to you wherever you are.
Oh shit! Like immediately?
Yeah, I think if you're a certain distance, yeah. That's the first time it happened to me, right? Because I was, as a player, trying to not die. So I was like, I'll just zoom in and take a picture because I don't know what the hell that is. And then I did, and he warped right to me and killed me.
Oh wow! See, I actually, I was just like walking around, and I still couldn't tell what it was, but like I still had that sense of dread. I was looking around trying to see if something else was coming, and I like kept my eyes on him, and like I turned, and a tree passed between me and the creature, and I heard the ting, and it was gone, and I was like, oh no, oh no.
Yeah.
So I like sprinted up, and I was looking around and like trying to see what happened, and I saw the weird symbol on the wall, and then it killed me.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what happened to me, other than, obviously, the first time I played it, I was just zooming in, trying to take a picture, so I wasn't able to get caught like that. But yeah, there's at least there was for me, a couple moments like that, where it shows, Paratopic anyway, shows how there's moments where it can show you that you want to explore things, but it doesn't, force your hand. Like, it has opportunities for the player to look around, to try to get close to things, to notice them, but that evokes our fear, right? I mean, we're afraid of getting close to scary things, but that's the only way to figure out if it's really scary, which is super, like, just genius, just like such a smart way of doing it. Even though, again, it's not really a horror game, it has that sense of being a horror game. It has that dread, like you mentioned. It is scary, not on purpose necessarily, but yes, on purpose necessarily. You know what I'm saying?
Hot take. Paratopic is a perfect example of how to make a horror game that, instead of playing on strict atmospheric horror and jump scares, plays on the tension that builds when you can't tell what something is and when the music is building up. Especially at that last moment. But did you get to the first hiker sequence? Did you find the hidden door in the red cabin?
Yeah, of course I did. Yeah, of course.
I didn't find that until my last time through.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Even knowing that wasn't going to kill me was still incredibly terrifying, because that door, you bang on it and then you leave and then it opens and you go in and there's nothing in there except exposition. And that's the only, like, air quotes expositional part in the whole game, really?
For the most part, yeah. I mean, there's moments where you're learning about stuff, like with a gas station owner, and there's exposition that's obviously very cryptic and not really helpful as much as it is giving you an opportunity to ask more questions. But yeah, that is really the most, there's a story here that you don't know part of the game, which is cool. I enjoyed that there wasn't a lot of that in that one moment. It becomes more profound when you actually find it, yeah.
I want more, man. I want to know more about this world. I want to know...
For sure.
I want to know everything about it. Give me an open world Paratopic with Ubisoft towers and an RPG system.
Let David Cage make the next Paratopic game. Just let him do it. Come on. Okay, no one better.
I hope Doc doesn't listen to this podcast.
Another element of the visuals that I really wanted to talk about was the obviously there's the low res element of it, like I said, like we were just talking about, but there's another part of it, the way it looks anyways, that I think is really, really interesting. When you're driving in the car, I don't know if you noticed it, but it's either the texture of the actual car itself, or it's the texture for like the skybox and all the models you see as you're driving around. But very slowly, there's like extra pixels of darkness added to it. And it's something I didn't notice until like halfway through when I was on the second or third driving section.
How it does the sunset, basically, the transition from day to night.
Basically, yeah, but for whatever reason, it didn't feel like that's what it was trying to say, right? Like, it wasn't trying to show it becoming nighttime. It felt more like it was trying to show what was happening to the character as they moved forward in the journey. That they felt like they were sinking deeper into the darkness, and obviously, because again, it's restricting its view with the lower resolution and with the darker texture that's being applied to the car. The whole game, all the skybox, everything, when you're doing the driving sections later on, they feel scarier. Like significantly scarier.
Yeah.
Because obviously you can't tell what's going on, right? At one point you're driving past what looks like electrical towers, but like you don't really know what they are. The first time it was coming towards me, I was like,
farmhouses,
yeah, stuff like
silos.
random weird stuff like that.
Boat.
And that really plays into, I think, like, obviously I'm not a driver. I don't drive, but when you're, I've been in cars late at night, and when you're driving around in the countryside or when you're going somewhere you've never been before, there's this element of like fear or misunderstanding or curiosity, the same way you feel when you look at the clouds, right? Like you try to draw certain images onto them. You apply that fear onto the clouds.
It is a thing that our brains do even in our own bedrooms when we're lying awake at night and you see a shape in the closet and you're like, oh great, it's the demons.
Yeah, exactly.
That
You're looking at your stucco ceiling.
Yeah. And I want to say, I'm glad that you brought this up because I wanted to talk about this. It does such a fantastic job of evoking the sense of a road trip. Not as good as Jalopy, but I want to say it's close because in different ways. This plays on how you feel when you're surrounded by things you don't know, where Jalopy is more about the actual mechanics of a road trip. But with Paratopic, especially with the night sequences, having recently done a 15-hour drive from Colorado back down to Texas, we didn't get home until midnight. And there were parts in that drive where we're going through areas almost exactly like the night sequence in Paratopic. It's rolling hills. There's nobody on the road. There's no lights. And with the horrible vision at night that I have, it was extremely terrifying. Because you don't know what's coming up. You don't know where you are. And there's one gas station and you're low on gas. And can I make it to the next one? Or am I going to go inside and there's going to be a freaky meat man at my car?
Yeah. It's all of a sudden like, what's going on?
It's incredible how small details play such a big role in the atmosphere in the story. And I did not at any point pull in that theme idea that you just had of like it represents the character's life and personage sleeping deeper into the darkness of existence as they try to escape from this hole of poverty that they're in.
Yeah. And like if you were to say that the order of the driving sequences and the gas station sequences, because obviously that's the same character, if that were going on. Really? You don't think that's the same character?
All three of these characters have to drive somewhere.
That's true. And there are two sequences in the gas station. One where you don't see the car, one where you do see the car.
And there are 3 different states of something being in the passenger seat. It's either the cassette case, it's either the gun, or it's nothing.
Well, that changes based on how you look at it. It shows you it changes in the same driving sequence.
It does. I think it's to sort of meld together the idea that these 3 characters are extremely intertwined, even if they have nothing to do with each other outright.
Right. That's good. That does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I like it. It's so good. Fuck, it's so good!
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff there to really digest and think about, which is, for a game that's only 30, 40 minutes long, is crazy.
It says a lot.
That's super impressive, yeah. Yeah. More than games that are, the same amount of time, but in hours that I have for me in the last little while, especially this year.
There's a lot of games this year that have been very long without saying very much at all, and I think that Paratopic is kind of a really good example of brevity is the soul of wit.
Yeah, no, for sure. It very much sells anyone that plays it on the idea that you could say more with less. And I mean, that's been something that we've been seeing more and more said in the games industry for the last 10 years, right? I mean, I've played
Depending
loads
on
of
where you
short
look.
games. Yeah, depending on where you look, obviously certain genres and certain subcategories of the community of gaming and gamers in general have different respects for games, right? I mean, if you look at the AAA space, more means more for them. In the indie space, even now for indies, more means more in some cases. You're getting longer and longer games, but you've also got games like Minute, right, that are like an hour long, maybe
But
2 hours, depending on how
it's
good you are at it.
60-second sequences.
Yeah, and but that's more me just saying, like, you know, it being shorter, not necessarily that it is shorter sequences within the game
No,
itself.
I know what you mean. There's a lot to digest with Minute and how fucking great it is. Let's not get into that.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, in general, there's been lots of short indie games, but there's even been longer indie games as well, and we're just
Okay.
seeing more and more value for your dollar that's being approached. But I mean, you know, outside of a very small number of outliers, the indie games that people end up respecting the most, that they end up looking back on fondly, are the shorter ones, right? Like, yeah, Undertale's kind of long, but it's like, for a game in that genre, it's not that long. And even then, it's an outlier in its length, right? There's lots of indie games that are super short, like the one that we're going to be playing soon next month.
Teasers.
Yeah. You know, lots of other games in the space, even this year, that I've played that I thought were better for what they were in their shortness. Monster Garden, Fee. But then I also played longer games like Le Grand Legacy and would Lost Sphere count as indie? I guess so.
You're actually naming some games I don't know. I gotta play Ketchup.
Get at me, dude. Yeah, it's showing me more and more that, like, how much I appreciate shorter games, not just as a person that likes to have his time respected as I get a little older and have more things that I want to do with my time, but also just as somebody that, like, respects games that have something to say. Like, you can't say anything in 20 hours. As much as that sounds weird to say, you really can't. Because if you say something cool in the first 2, I'm going to forget it at the 10th or the 15th, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Or that's what I'll stick with, right? I'll stick with that one cool thing you said 2 hours in, and by the 20th, I'll be like, can we go back to the cool bit you said at the start? Like, I hate to rip on God of War as much as I liked it, but the stranger fight was the best part of the game.
Was the best part of the fucking game.
And, like there's moments that I thought were better than that narratively, but for the most part, like, as a whole package, that was the best part of the game. And the fact that the game never gets that close again is,
even though it tries,
depressing as shit. But it's, you know, it's a 30-hour long game. You can't be that good, or depending on how long it takes you to beat it, around 30 hours, I'd say, if you do everything important. I'd say, like, you know, the length of the game hurts what it's able to do, which is a shame. I think the only game I played that was long that really pulled off having the same story or the same line thing it's trying to say anyways, that wasn't an older game that was clearly, you know, less mechanically and visually complex and was able to tell its story for a longer period of time, would be pretty much exclusively Assassin's Creed Origins, which is super weird to say out loud. But
I'm
it's,
making a face right now.
Dude, okay, let me explain. But I don't want to get too far into it. But basically, it's just, you know, it focuses on grief, and that's what the game's about from pretty much start to finish. It's super cool. And then you've got something like Paratopic that focuses so clearly on its smaller, more focused story on how players interact with things and the minutia of the world. And
a very distant meta story of,
yeah,
you know, themes of poverty and violence.
Yeah, and you see all that stuff that it's telling in that small amount of time, and even though I thought Origins was a really good example of telling a story the whole way through, it still doesn't say it as clearly, as profoundly, and as, like, honestly as Paratopic tells any of the things it's trying to say in, like, like 100th of the time, which is super, super interesting, and just something that I think they deserve more respect for as developers.
Hell yeah. To all of that. You're spot the fuck on, my dude. I literally don't have anything to say because you said that so well. I have pretty much talked, like, I've cohesively talked about everything I think I can say about Paratopic, or, like, you've said what I wanted to say. Did you have any questions? I don't have any questions for you, really. Oh, I do have one. Did you get a picture of the red bird?
Yeah, I mean, you have to get it to get the achievement.
Okay, cool. You never told me if you got all the achievies, so I didn't know.
Oh, yeah, I went back and got them all, yeah.
Yeah.
Had to make sure I knew everything before we came into this.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
That bird is a pain in the ass. Oh
yeah,
my
there's like a very
God.
specific distance you can get to take the photo, which is such a pain.
No, I just zoomed in and clicked a lot. That's what I did.
That's fair. I mean, obviously that's what I was doing too, but I mean, like, there's only a certain distance you can get it before it starts flying away.
I feel like I got lucky doing it.
It took a while.
Ooh, what do you think the best moment was?
I don't know. That's tough. Yeah, that's tough. There's a lot of like cool shit. So
yeah, I think it's a tie between two moments for me. 3 moments, which is essentially the whole game at that point. There's when you bust down the door and the title shows up. That like sold me immediately.
That stuck out to me in a funny way because the title is like super low res and ugly.
Yeah, it sticks out really
it just
weird.
kind of pops on the screen.
I thought it was just such a blockbuster transition, though. Like it was just.
I mean, you kick the door down, the guy's there, you're gonna shoot him, but you don't come back to that for a while. So that was really cool.
You don't come back to that for like 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah, and
when you come back to it, the music is already going. Then there's if you give the lady the tape and peek in through the door. I got to experience that with my friends. So on my second playthrough, I got to see that. I didn't see it on the first one. I had no idea what was gonna happen, and we screamed. Because like you give her the tape and you walk down the hall, you're like, oh, this door is open. Let's take a look. Oh, she's watching. Oh no.
Yeah, and then she look at you face, and you're like, heck. So that was one of them. Oh, that was the second one. Sorry.
That was the second one, and then the third is when you discover the underground base in the Red Shack. Those are the 3 best moments in that game.
Yeah, no, those are really good moments for sure. I'm trying to think if there's anything I liked that wasn't that woman's face.
It was so
when
good.
You give her the tape. Like, it's a great reveal. And it really, really explains how important those tapes are and like why they're being smuggled and why the person giving you the objective is so serious about things when you're talking to them first time. So yeah, that's probably the best one for me for sure.
It's so good.
Mm-hmm. And if you don't give her the tape, like, if you don't give her the tape and you don't play the game again, you're playing a totally different game. Like, you don't know what the tapes are about, and that's so cool.
I thought that was super interesting, and that's what I was talking to my friends about, is like, I did not see that my first time through, and so the remainder of the game, for me, was just like, oh, this is kind of weird. It's kind of a weird atmosphere to this game. It's kind of dread fulfilled, but like, I wasn't scared of anything until I saw the figure in the woods. But then when I went through with them and we saw that moment, it gave everything that happened after it an entirely new context. And I was like, okay, if something can change that much, what's coming next? What is going on? I didn't trust the game anymore, if that makes sense.
No, definitely. Yeah, like what how true is that really from your first playthrough? Yeah, so that's definitely like, very interesting.
Because I did this, is the Meat Man even gonna be there?
Yeah. I mean, obviously everything's linear, so everything happened no matter what. But
I didn't know that.
Yeah, but yeah, that's the point of it, right? It's that your agency is the important thing. It's not so much that you have some impact on the plot or the progression of story points or whatever. It's just that you got to make a choice, and that says something about how you appreciate the story, right? Game gives you context, you give it the answers to questions, which is really cool.
Yeah. It's fantastic.
Mm-hmm. All right. I do have a question for you before
hit me with your best shot.
Viewer questions. Don't worry, I'll hit you right with one, Blondie. Don't worry about it. Why is the game out of order?
So there's a couple thoughts that I have on this. One is because nonlinear storytelling is very cool. And it gives the player more to work with and theorize on, which is kind of one of the themes that we've been talking about this whole episode, is that this is a game about theories as much as it is anything else. 2 is because there's a whole lot in this game that's done to make you question everything that's going on, and make you feel almost like you're in a dream or like you're remembering something. And when you remember a story or an event, or even especially when you remember a dream, you remember bits and pieces. It's often disjointed, and it's probably out of order depending on how long it's been. So having these vignettes out of order or just presented in a chaotic way like this makes you question everything that's going on in front of you in the game. And in a game that's about instilling, or in a game that's trying to fill you with a sense of dread, the best way to do that is to make you not trust or question everything that's going on. And what better way to do that than give it to you out of order?
Yeah, no, that's really good.
Do you have an answer to that question?
I mean, that's pretty much what I was going to say, yeah, and that the it being out of order is specifically so that you don't know what's going on, and it makes you question things in a really unique way, obviously. Like Virginia. Again, I like to bring that up because they're very similar in a lot of ways. The smash cuts, the limited but more monotonous forms of interaction, or just, making up for the monotony of the interactions. There's lots of stuff like that in Virginia that this game does in a similar way. And in that game, it being out of order gives you an opportunity to respect things and reflect on things. Like, the order and the way the cuts go give you opportunities to, like, respect parts of it, right? You get to reflect on what's been happening, and you get to look back on things as you go to the next part. So, like, there's a bit where you're in jail and another part where you're at work. And, like, what does that say about how the character remembers things, right? Like, do they connect work with jail? Like, how do they perceive their job? Is it just something they're stuck in, right? So all that sort of stuff is really, really interesting. And it just thinking about that in Paratopic in a similar way made me consider why it was like that, right? Is it for the same reason, or is it for a different one? And as I watched and played along with it, it became more and more obvious that it's not about any sort of reflection of society or anything like that. Like, you don't, go from the apartment to wherever you go to after that. Like, nothing really connects for any particular reason. It's just kind of vignettes that are meant to throw you off, which I think is really cool. Like, it just throwing you off is a fun way of using the smash cuts between different sequences.
Yeah, 100%. Yep. So on that note, do you think we want to get to our handful of viewer questions that we have this month?
I do believe it is time, sir.
Okay, fantastic. Put some more music here. Because why not? So our first question, and again, you can submit these in a few different ways, which are mentioned all in the description for the episode. But our first question comes from Daniel, aka @ShentaiReviews on Twitter, and Shentai on YouTube, I think. And his question is, quote, "It seems that the horror genre is largely ignored by the AAA industry. Why is it that it seems to have found a new home with indie developers?" End quote.
Oh, that's an easy one, obviously. I mean,
all right.
Well, not an easy one. There's a lot to it, but
there's
that's just one that
to it. Yeah.
That's just one where there's an immediate answer that comes to my mind. I mean, you can look back at Dead Space, right? And really just the industry in general. When you look at AAA games, there's this very specific choice for everything to be meticulously designed. There's visual aspects that they want the player to see at all times, right? They want to make sure that every penny they spent on development, on design, on visual elements of games is utilized, right? But horror doesn't operate very well in that space. Like, horror doesn't work well when you could see everything. And that's why, again, we were talking about it earlier with Paratopic, with the visuals, it being so limited in its resolution, it being so dirty and gross, and the faces being so garbled, and the fact that they're low resolution and very low poly makes them stand out in a really interesting way. And it makes them look more unsettling because they don't look realistic. They're not aiming to create something that you could understand, a facsimile of life, right? It's just trying to be creepy. And it does a lot with that in good ways. But in a AAA game, the player has to see everything, and as soon as you see the monster, it stops being scary. Like Alien Isolation is a really good example of something that's close to being a AAA horror game, but it's not really scary after the first couple hours. Like as soon as you see the alien,
once you understand how it works,
creepy.
it becomes more tense than scary.
Exactly. And that's because there's mechanics that they want you to understand. They want you to use the flamethrower. They want you to understand how to use the tracker and stuff like that. As much as it's still creepy and it's not, it's not immediately not scary because you experienced one death from the alien, but it is very much, tailored for the player to see stuff. The xenomorph comes right in your face. It's not at a distance, it doesn't creep you out and scare you. It just,
they make sure you get a really fucking good look at it.
Yeah. And I mean, you can look at the film industry too for horror as well, obviously, in the same sort of sense. I mean, you can look at the Blair Witch Project when that came out compared to everything else horror that was coming out at the time. Lots of schlocky crap, lots of stuff that we look back on as funny movies.
So what's interesting about Blair Witch is that it doesn't want you to see anything. There's a whole 2-minute section where it's just black screen. There's no video.
I mean, literally the ending is something happening off screen. Like the conclusion of the film is something you don't see.
Yeah, that's really cool. I hadn't quite thought about it like that. My answer to this is that it's because it's kind of a two-part. Horror is very niche. Even in film, it's niche. Not everybody likes to go and get their pants scared off, just like not everybody likes to ride a roller coaster. And horror is a bigger risk. There are definitely things that humans on an evolutionary psychological level have visceral flight reactions to, right? Like jump scares are an example. Yeah. But you can't just fill your game with jump scares. You have to be smarter than that. There's so much more that you have to do at the risk that it's not gonna work. Whereas with other games like shooters, give the dude a gun, shoot the other dudes. It's gonna work every time you do it. It'll have varying degrees of success, but it's always gonna work because it's formulaic. With games, you can't really be formulaic with horror, or people are gonna know what's gonna happen. So it's harder to execute. To that end, you have to take big risks with horror. Even in the indie realm, you have to experiment. You have to take huge risks. Like Paratopic is a huge experiment in what you can do to instill fear in the player. But if you're a AAA game, you have margins. You can't really do an experiment because you have to be able to guarantee that your game's going to do what it does good enough for people to tell people to buy it. And so it's a money thing. And it's a lack of room to make risks thing. That's pretty much how I feel about it.
No, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you could look at, again, Dead Space. It's just one of the best examples from the last 10 years, right?
It was more action horror than horror.
Yeah, but it's still scary. I mean, no one played that game the first time and wasn't, like, at least a little terrified. Or at least Dead Space 2,
I wasn't trying to, like, argue against that. Like, it's definitely a scary game.
Yeah, it elevates itself with the addition of the action segments. Like, it lets players have something to latch onto, even if they're not into horror. They still have that action element that they can enjoy.
They have that familiarity to kind of
there's something to link to. And they know the players are going to be interested in it because who doesn't like an action game? And it's an action game where your gun cuts things in half, right? So that's really cool.
Yeah.
And it works in that regard. But again, like, there's as much as there's elements of the cost benefit analysis, right? There's elements of just indie people understanding what makes something scary better than AAAs ever really will, I think. There's just a lot to it. There's a lot, but what I think it comes down to is just needing to be creative, right? Mm-hmm. Like you said, formulaic fear isn't scary. It's just formulaic.
It'll get a reaction of you. It will scare you, but it's not going to last.
Mm-hmm.
Horror probably evolves faster than a lot of other genres.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, shit, I was just profound. I'm proud of that. Go me. Okay. I felt like a smart thing I said.
No, it was, yeah.
So thanks for your question, Daniel. Moving on, you got one for us, Jesse.
I do. I have one from Emma. That is at Ander01DPeach or Heartbox on YouTube. And they asked, what makes the distinction for a game to be survival horror instead of just horror?
This is a really fun question because, like, if you look at it on a literal sense, in horror games, even if they're not in the survival horror, you're still trying to survive, right? I think mechanically it comes down to a distribution of resources and maybe context. Like, I've been playing Condemned, right? That is a horror game. It's not a survival...
That's an action horror game.
It's an action horror game.
Yeah.
The reason it's not survival horror is because they literally put health boxes after every encounter.
Yeah.
Which I'm real mad I realized that, but I digress. And even with Paratopic, it's a horror game, but it's not survival horror because you don't have any health or resources to manage. But then you look at Silent Hill, or maybe even... No, I'm not... I was going to say BioShock, but I can't convince myself of that.
No.
At parts, maybe. But you look at Silent Hill or Resident Evil, and you are struggling to stay alive and make it to the next section because you have so few resources. Survival becomes a much more active goal in the game.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's really what it comes down to for survival, or it's all resources. As much as it could be something else, right? I think it just comes down to resources entirely. Like, your fear of running out of something is the scariest part of the game at times. Especially with Resident Evil 1. I played that recently. I think last year I played that for the first time. That was really fun. But
did you play the remake or the original?
The remake.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't be bothered to play the original. What's the point of playing an ugly version if I can play a pretty version? That's the same thing.
Got him.
The best part of that game for me was the serious fear that I had a limited number of saves. Not that I can only save at certain points like Alien Isolation, not that I can only save in certain points like Dead Space, but the fact that I can only save in certain points and I only could save a certain number of times.
That's right.
That was terrifying.
You have to use tapes, and there's only like a
the
handful of
or whatever,
them, right?
Yeah, like you only have so many times, like a finite number of saves, which is so smart because you're not forced to, or not forced rather, you're not given opportunities to save as many times as you'd like. You can't press pause and save and try something, and if you die, move forward. And there's not checkpoint systems, so if you die and you were close to something that the game's considering important enough for you to work past again, it'll respawn you, because it's not interested in whether or not you are getting to where you need to be or where the game wants you to be or getting closer to the end. This goes back to what I was saying at the AAA thing. There's very few AAA survival horror games. Exactly. They want you to see everything. So survival horror is really wanting you to work for that and making you scared of the possibility of not being able to. So that's really cool. I like that part of it. And that's probably what would define the difference for me, is whether or not they want you to be afraid of resources or not.
Good answer. All right. Well, thanks Emma Heartbox Android Peach.
Yeah, Ender01D Peach. Thank you.
Right. I have to start pronouncing it correctly. I'm not used to this new name.
Honestly.
All right. Our next question, third and last question from Ben of Egoism on Twitter. And I quote, what horror game you recommend for its dick-licking goodness?
See, I'm very glad this is how it ended up. I was going to say that one, but I didn't have to. That is a really great question. I'm assuming we're just saying goodness, and we're going to pretend that the dick-licking part never happened. I
don't know of any horror games that involve dick-licking, so...
I mean, you've never played the Venom game, then. Yeah, there's a lot
of... Is there a Venom game?
No, I'm joking.
Damn it!
It's just a funny reference, May.
Damn it. How dare you?
I mean, I guess the question there is, what's your favorite horror game?
That's a really fucking good question.
Yeah, I guess that's really what it is, what it comes down to.
Man. So this is where it gets kind of funny for me because I don't like horror games as much as I like horror movies. For reasons of I don't have to push the forward button, somebody else is doing it for me.
Yeah.
I don't actually handle horror very well, which is kind of funny. I really like... Hang on, I literally just made a list of good-ass indie horror games. So I really like Sunless Sea, even though it's not a horror game. It has a lot of spooky elements to it, and I think it's a great atmospheric, spooky game. But if you're looking for straight-up horror, look up Kitty Horror Show, because she makes the best, hands down best, indie horror games I have ever seen. They're all so different. They're all amazing. Check out, what was it called? There's one specific one, but just check out her itch.io page because it's amazing.
What was the name of it again?
Kitty Horror Show. KITTYHORRORSHOW. Anatomy is the game.
Ah, yeah, Anatomy. I heard about that one.
I've heard a lot of people play that one. The first one that I played from her was Churza, which is like you're just exploring a world. It's a lot like Paratopic in that you're dropped into a place and told to go. She also did Dust City, but Anatomy is absolutely amazing, and I never want to play it again because it scares the shit out of me.
Damn, I'll have to check that out. For me, Resident Evil 7. Like, I wanted to say Resident Evil 1 because I like that a lot and it scared me at points, and it freaked me out, but Resident Evil 7, like, bar none, it is insanely good. It's, it's fun. I mean, the ending, it has the same problem Alien Isolation has, where it's long and it shows you too much and it gives you too many mechanics to solve the problem, so it stops being scary. But, at the end of the day, it's terrifying. The first few hours, the middle points of the game, even parts where you still have a lot of ammo and stuff, they still demand a lot of you. They demand that you look for scary things in order to have what you need in order to make things less scary and easier to fight. Like when you're skulking around different houses and when you're even outside of the mansion, it's very much asking you to like approach something that looks terrifying in the hopes that you'll have what you need, and you're going to waste a bunch of ammo and you're going to get terrified and things are going to be chasing you and stuff's going to show up when you're not expecting it. And that's really good. But easily, like, the scariest moment from that game that sticks out of my head, the one thing I remember the most that just terrified the crap out of me is there's this whole little puzzle in the mansion where you have to find a piece to make a shadow puzzle work, and just that whole section. Yes, where
I know exactly.
I don't remember if it's about. Right, it's so good. I don't remember if it's the wife or the husband or which one it is.
Both
one of the
are
characters
really good
is
for
following
different. Both are really, really good for different reasons.
Yeah, but man, yeah, just that whole section, man, sticks out in my mind so well. It's just terrifying, and it is the one thing that makes me want to buy a PlayStation 4 Pro and a PlayStation VR.
And do the VR?
So
God,
I can play it in VR.
I
that
really want
to
play it in VR. I really do.
Yeah.
Like, in the AAA realm, I 100% agree with you. Resident Evil 7 is one of the best horror games.
Yeah, and really, it's the only one I can think of that's AAA since the last big couple games, like Dead Space, which I've said 100 times now. Like,
Yeah. No, definitely. Oh, Observer's really good too, but for very different reasons. Observer is a lot like Amnesia. Observer has a lot of problems, but there is one sequence in that game that makes the entire game worth it, and it's the sequence about the Wolf Man, and that's all I'm gonna say, but it is amazing. The rest of the game can go suck it, but play Observer for that one section. I'm not even kidding. Yeah. So that's all of our audience questions for this episode.
Yeah, thanks for asking, guys. Really appreciate getting questions sent in. It's very nice.
So, without further ado, I think we're ready to start wrapping things up. So let's do that. Shall we? Let us proceed to close. So thank you guys for joining us for this month's episode of Byte Club. Again, Byte Club, not Monthly Bytes, because this is a better name. Next month's game is Return of the Obra Dinn. And Jesse, you picked this one, so tell us a bit about it.
Sure. So Return of the Obra Dinn is a game developed by Lucas Pope. He was the creator of... How would you what genre would you put on that? The border fascism game called Papers, Please.
My favorite genre.
Yeah, great genre. It's pinned as a sort of detective game that takes place on a pirate ship called the Obra Dinn. The player has to sort of go around and discover what happened on it. You're playing, obviously, a detective game, so you are doing some detecting, possibly of a murder. And it takes place in a sort of low poly monochromatic world. It kind of looks like you're looking at a 3D game through the lens of a Game Boy, which visually is very gorgeous. It looks like it's a lot of fun. I've heard very, very good things, and it's what we're planning to discuss in next month's episode of Byte Club.
Yeah. So you can find Obra Dinn on Steam, GOG, and the Humble Store for about $20. There is also a demo of a very early prototype build of this game available on itch.io totally for free. So if you want to check that out and like decide if you want to make the dive, but this is next month's game, and I'm really excited for this one.
Oh yeah, me too.
So as always, we will be taking your questions about next month's game and chatting about them here on the podcast. So send them in as you come up with them. You can find all this information I'm about to spat out on the website at indie-bytes.com/byteclub. But here's the info. We now have 3 ways that you can send in questions. You can email them to Nevyn, Nevyn, at indie-bytes.com. You can use the contact form on indie-bytes.com, or you can reply to a post that I'm going to pin to the Indie Bytes Twitter profile. If you do email your questions, don't put any spoilers in the title, because we might still be playing the game.
Please.
And lastly, I have just a little bit of bookkeeping. This episode was edited by the fantastic Myles With A, so many thanks be upon him. You can find Jesse's content on Twitter and YouTube at Chadunda, that's CHADUNDA. You can find more of my own content on Twitter at IndieBytesYT, on YouTube under IndieBytes, and at indie-bytes.com, which I'm kind of getting tired of saying. And the music used in this episode is from the Paratopic soundtrack by BeauChaotica. You can find this soundtrack on Bandcamp. Or I think you can buy a version of the game with the soundtrack on itch.io, and you can find the soundtrack itself on Steam also. I delivered that like crap, but you can find it in those places probably. God.
That's fine.
Got any departing notes, Jesse?
No, I just... Paratopic's a great game, so if you're listening to this and you haven't played it, despite the fact that we spoiled a lot of it, definitely still give it a try, and I hope if you are listening, you follow through on getting Return of the Obra Dinn. I know it's a little bit of a pricey title. $20 is a little much for a game that you're not entirely sure what you'll be playing, but I'm certain it'll be something worth your time.
Yeah, that's I also don't have much else to say, so thank you once again for listening. We're really looking forward to getting more of your questions and to seeing you next month. Bye.
Yeah.